Hi, everyone, and welcome to tonight's presentation. I'm happy to see so many familiar faces and new ones as well. Tonight, we are joined by someone a lot of you may know, Poolesville resident and award-winning professor, Christine Rye. Christine is an interdisciplinarian who specializes in food studies, culture, and folklore. Tonight, she will be guiding us through a basic wine pairing guidelines for each of the main styles of cheese. Christine also joined us last October for a presentation on lavender. So if you're interested in that, you can watch it on our YouTube or check out more of her work at christinerye.com. Reminder, please remain muted during the presentation. You can send any questions you have throughout in the chat, and there will be an opportunity at the end to unmute for Q&A. If you enjoyed tonight's presentation, please make sure to check out our website and register to join us again next week. Without further ado, Christine, take it away.
Thank you, Dottie. Welcome, everybody. We have a packed presentation for tonight. If I kind of start checking my time, I might speed up a little bit. So if I zoom past something you don't catch, please don't worry. The whole PowerPoint will be emailed to you later, so you can easily go back and review things and click on any of the hyperlinks, as well as watching the YouTube. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. And can everyone see the PowerPoint?
Yep.
Okay, great. So here we have the title slide. Dottie already introduced me. I just want to riff off of that a little bit and say I'm a cheese enthusiast. I did teach cheese classes at Crisafulli's Cheese Shop in downtown Frederick, which is sadly no more, for 3 years, and taught on a variety of all kinds of topics about cheese. It was amazing. And if you look at this really flattering picture of me, that was a 2016 Frederick Community College trip to France that was food and culture themed. And that is in the cheese warehouse in the huge food market outside of Paris, Rougy Market. And that is like a giant wedge of Alpine cheese I'm holding. So it was quite amazing. So I'm gonna jump right in and get started. So tonight we're going through a lot of stuff. Like I said, I'll begin with a quick cheese overview. We'll delve a little bit into the science of pairing wine and cheese. We'll talk about some of the basic styles of cheese and suggested pairings. I'll also be covering some non-alcoholic alternatives, tips for serving and storing cheese, tips for tasting cheese. I'll give you some resources if you want to dive in and learn some more things. And of course, we'll have time for Q&A. Sound good? Okay, so quick cheese overview. If you can take a moment to just reflect on a few different kinds of cheese that you've had, cheese is really diverse, right? It can come from many different places in the world. It can be many different styles, from something that's very bland, very mild, very soft, to things that are very assertive and strongly flavored, strongly scented. Maybe you feel like that cheese might bite you back a little bit. But no matter what kind of cheese you're enjoying, it always has 3 ingredients. And those 3 ingredients are milk of some kind, salt, and some kind of cultures. And if you look at the graphic on this slide, all cheeses are made with these same basic steps. Depending on the style of cheese, some additional steps may be added or removed, but basically you are salting the cheese, you're adding the cultures, you're heating it slightly. Here in the US, we can only make cheese with pasteurized milk. And then in some way you are generally pressing or cutting it into a certain shape or form. Now, if you look at our second bullet point about cheese styles, this is not a hard science. There is no national or even internationally codified categories of cheese. So there are actually far more than just this list here: fresh, bloomy rind, semi-soft, washed rind, hard, and blue. But those are the ones that we'll be talking about tonight for the sake of simplicity. If we're going to talk about cheese and wine, we should talk about terroir. And if at any point you want to break open that bottle of wine if you have one handy. If you want to enjoy some cheese, please feel free. I'm not leading you in a structured tasting tonight, so feel free to enjoy at home however you like. But back to the slide. If we're going to talk about cheese and wine, we need to talk about terroir, which is a French word, as you might have guessed from the impossible pronunciation. And terroir is basically a taste of place. So what this means is, if you have a food product, whether it's a beverage or an actual food item, the idea behind terroir is all of the factors that go into producing that food or that drink item can be then tasted in the final product. So for example, if you think about what goes into producing a bottle of wine, you have the soil, you have the climate, you have the particular water in the water table, you have the microclimate of the actual vineyard, you have the human factors, right? How are those vines nurtured? How are they cared for? When are the grapes picked? Once the grapes are picked, what particular steps are used? What traditions go into creating that glass of wine? All of these things go into the terroir. Same thing with cheese, right? So with cheese, you have, the flora in the area, which the animals are going to graze upon, all the climate stuff, the soil stuff that goes into that, as well as the breed of the animal, how it's cared for, when they're milked, and then all of those processes that go into making a cheese. So it's really a complex and really cool thing if you think about it. And if you're like, I don't know about this, this sounds a little wishy-washy to me, think about a type of cheese or a type of wine that you've enjoyed that have come from different places, right? If you have like a Chardonnay from California versus a Chardonnay from France, you can find that there is a very distinctly different taste. And even within a particular region, you can have differences in flavor due to the terrain and all of these other things that go into terroir. I also want to point out that wine and cheese are both agricultural products and they're both fermented foods. So unlike just say, here I have a fig from my garden, okay? I went out and picked that fig. I can enjoy it. I don't have to do a thing to it if I don't want to. But if you want to enjoy wine and cheese, of course, that requires more interaction and more intervention from humans. So it's sort of another layer of terroir, if you will. And why is it important to know this stuff? I think that when we know more about our food, where it comes from and how it's made, I think we can more deeply appreciate it and savor it. And I think it also helps us to feel more connected to the land, to nature, and to the people that work hard to create our food. So for me, this knowledge is really helpful. So let's start talking more specifically about some wine and food pairings. What is the science behind pairing food and wine? I hate to tell you, but there's not one. The reason why is it's incredibly complicated. There are so many different varieties of cheese from all around the world. There's so many different varieties of wine from all around the world. The vintages can change, and how these food products interact. It's kind of spin the wheel. So I'm not going to give you any sort of like hard rules tonight. I'm going to give you some guidelines. I'm going to give you some best tips. So then you will feel more empowered to make a choice that pleases your palate and your particular favorite flavors. So when you're pairing wine and food, you really want to look for balance. Master sommelier Alan Murray says there are 3 possible outcomes when you're pairing wine and food, including cheese. Number 1, the flavor of the food dominates the flavor of the wine. Number 2, the flavor of the wine dominates the flavor of the food. And then we have number 3, the flavor of the wine enhances the flavors of the food and vice versa. Can you guess which one we want to go for? Number 3, okay? When we're pairing wine and cheese or any kind of food, we want there to be balance between them. Just like the image on the slide, you can see, you may recall in the 70s, this crazy French man put a tightrope wire across the Twin Towers and walked across it without being anchored. I'm not asking you to take that kind of risk. We're just pairing wine and cheese, but we are looking for that balance. And that's a very important concept to keep in mind. So talking a little bit about the science behind enjoying and understanding this balance of wine and cheese is, how do we create this taste profile, right, in our brains? So basically, taste is something that originates in our brains after taking in all the separate information from the flavors, the aromas, the textures, the sapidities, which is the depth, the length, and the persistence of flavor. If you don't know what that means, if you have ever eaten, let's see, everything bagel, or you've ever eaten a dish with lots of garlic, and afterwards you drank lots of water, maybe you even brushed your teeth and chewed some gum, and you're like, I can still taste that. That's what this refers to. Also, your retronasal tastes. Retro, of course, meaning back, so actually behind your nose. That goes into your sort of flavor profiles and your perception of flavor in your brain. That's why if you have a cold or you have allergies and your nose is stuffy, you can't taste things as easily, because that actually plays a really important role in taste. And the temperature of the food is important as well, which we'll talk about a little later, how to optimize the temperature of what you're enjoying. So here are some general guidelines. A lot of folks who talk about pairing wine and cheese say what grows together goes together. So going back to this idea of terroir, if you are talking about a taste of place, you could pair a French wine from a particular region in France with a cheese from that same region in France, or Italy, or Spain, or somewhere in the US, take your pick. But generally, because they have that same terroir in the area, that can be a good guideline. Also, thinking back to sort of the science of taste, you want to seek sensory balance in your pairings of wine and of cheese. Look at the richness of the cheese, the richness of the wine, the intensity of the flavors, and the complexity of the flavors. Remember, we're looking for balance. So you don't want one to overshadow the other. Another thing to keep in mind when you're pairing wine and cheese is to try to balance the basic flavors. So those 4 basic tastes of food, sour, sweet, salty, so on and so forth, plus the oak and the tannin content of the wine. That's going to be very important for picking a good pair. Now, we're going to get into the heart of the presentation. So if you signed up tonight and you're like, hey, I would really like some recommendations for what I can pair together, this next sequence of slides are for you. So I've broken them down into cheese styles, and I've broken them down and organized them from the mildest flavor to the strongest and most complex flavor. So if you were at home and you wanted to do your own wine and cheese tasting for yourself, for your friends and family, what have you, you could do it in the same order as well. So we're going to start off with fresh and bloomy Rhine cheeses. So I'm not going to read every single thing on this slide to you, because that would be pretty tedious for you, I think. But if you look, the first bullet point are very well-known fresh or bloomy Rhine cheeses. We're dealing with some really hot weather right now. These are great cheeses when you're just feeling overwhelmed by the heat. You want something fresh, you want something tasty. These cheeses are great for that. What pairs with them? The second bullet point is a general recommendation of wine profiles. They go well with dry, crispy, fruity wines. So interestingly enough, the same kind of wine you would probably like to drink on a hot day like a nice rosé, a nice light fruity white wine, even a light fruity red wine, a nice sparkling wine. These in general go really well with these fresh and bloomy Rhine cheeses. If you want some specific recommendations for wines, there's that list there, the third bullet point. So you can pick and choose, and you can try. Remember, you're going for that balance. Next one, cheese category, semi-soft cheeses. So these cheeses are aged a little more. They tend to have more complex flavors. They have a little more heft to them. And these are cheeses that tend to be really good snacking cheeses. So if you think of like your classic like cheese plate, or you want something that you could snack on maybe while you're watching a movie. Also, these cheeses are really great melting cheeses. So if you're looking for a cheese that you could put on a grilled cheese sandwich, you could put it on a pizza or a flatbread. These melt really, really nicely. So that first bullet are some typical and popular semi-soft cheeses, and they go with same kind of similar wines to the ones that would go well with the fresh and bloomy Rhine cheeses, but maybe a little more assertive, a little more aromatic, but you want to avoid anything that's oaked. You want to avoid anything that has really heavy tannins to it. So for these semi-soft cheeses, you're not going to pick like a really strong, bold, complex red wine. You want something that's fairly straightforward, because remember, you're going for balance. And there you see the third bullet point are some specific wine suggestions as well. The next category is an interesting one, washed rind cheeses. A nice way to put it is these are the funky cheeses, right? These are the ones that have a smell to them. Some people might describe them as feet or gym socks or laundry that needs attention. Let me think. I can't think of who said it. It was a French writer, if I remember correctly. And he said something along the lines of, the smell of cheese is like the smell of the feet of God. Which is like one of the most French things I've ever heard. So this category tends to be a love it or hate it category with a lot of people. But interestingly enough, these washed rind cheeses usually don't taste how they smell. So you may, I don't think I want to try that. But quite often the taste is much more nuanced than the smell would indicate. And just a little aside, why is it a washed rind cheese? Well, they go through all those steps to make a cheese. And then once the cheese is formed in the shape that it's going to be in, they wash it with some kind of brine. It could be a liqueur, it could be a beer, a cider, it could be a wine. So they keep brushing it with whatever the mixture is, and it's encouraging certain bacteria to colonize on the surface. So it gives the cheeses this sticky, more complex aroma and taste. So this category can be a little bit of a challenge. So for this category, you want to go with light-bodied, straightforward wines, because this is such a strong flavor. It could easily overwhelm a wimpy wine. And even if you got a big, tough red, a lot of the nuance to a complex wine is going to get washed out, pun intended, from these washed rind cheeses. But they're really delicious. Don't let the stench put you off. The next category of cheese are hard cheeses. And these cheeses are aged the longest. That's why they are considered hard cheeses. During the aging process, a lot of the excess water evaporates out from the cheeses. So they get drier, they get denser, and the flavors also get more concentrated. So if you like a really assertive aged cheddar, this is the category for you. Often with these aged hard cheeses, the longer they're aged, you may slice into them and you may see something that looks like salt crystals, or you may bite into a piece of an aged hard cheese and you may say, what's that crunch? And a lot of people do think it's salt, but this is actually protein crystals from all of that excess water evaporating out of the cheese, and all of these proteins are condensing. And in fact, a lot of people who enjoy hard cheeses specifically look for these and call them adult pop rocks. So they can be quite tasty. So you see some examples there at the first bullet point, very popular hard cheeses. And the longer they're aged, the stronger the flavor will get. You'll get more of those crystals. And additionally, the hard cheeses, the older they get, if you try to slice them in neat slices, it's not going to happen. If you look at the image on this slide, you can see that that cheese is just crumbling. So a lot of these will just crumble if you try to slice them. So as you might imagine, looking for balance, you want to go with a wine that's full-bodied, that's a mature wine and has some tannins to stand up to these intense, assertive, salty flavors. And what you see there is a long list of some possible specific wines that you can pair with these hard cheeses. But it's quite a tasty pairing, and many people enjoy hard cheeses. So if you're having friends and family over, this is definitely a category that you would want to include. Okay, and our next category is blue cheeses, kind of like the washed rind. This can be a little bit of a make it or break it, love it or leave it for a lot of people. And there, the first bullet point, you see some possibilities. I would like to add, if you have someone coming over and you're not sure how they feel about blue cheeses, there's a really nice Gorgonzola called Gorgonzola Dolce, sweet Gorgonzola. And part of that is made with, I almost said ricotta, it's not ricotta, mascarpone cheese. And so it gives it a lighter body. It's creamier, it has a higher fat content. And so that blue is tamped down a little bit. It's a little less assertive. So that can be a more friendly blue for people that are on the fence. I'm not going to say it's going to convert them because some people feel very strongly about blue cheese. Interestingly enough, with blue cheese, you want to go with an aromatic wine, and a lot of dessert wines are delicious with blue cheeses. Ports are really nice with blue cheeses as well. And I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, but I would also like to add that honey is delicious with blue cheese as well. So again, you want balance. You have all those complex, sometimes metallic, sometimes salty, right? Blue cheese flavors. So you're kind of doing the opposite. You're getting this sweet wine that has some nice syrupy kind of body to it. And it really is just a nice pairing altogether. So I showed you those slides and there was a lot listed on those slides. If your eyes glazed over and you were like, lady, just my life is complicated enough. Tell me what to do. Generally, these are some good pairings. If you're looking for a red wine that goes with most cheeses, a Zinfandel or a Syrah works out nicely. If you're looking for a white wine that goes with most cheeses, a Gewurztramine or a Riesling are some nice choices. And honestly, sparkling wine works pretty well with most cheeses. But again, keep in mind, it's not an exact science. If you're choosing, let's say, a cheese that has some added flavor to it, like maybe it has some herbs in it, or it has mustard, or it's been washed with wine or something like that, you might have to tweak some of these pairings a little bit. I would also tell you please remember the miracle of the internet. You don't have to memorize all this stuff. This is nuts. You can always look up a specific wine or cheese for Rex. And I do have some good resources on the resource slide to share with you, but you can also just Google it, like what wine goes well with Brie, or what cheese goes well with Shiraz, for example, and you'll get some good advice for sure. To show you how complex this is, I wanted to share with you this really cool graphic that I found doing research for tonight. And so you can see around the outer perimeter, those are various wines. And then the wedges inside are meant to be cheeses that pair well with those particular varietals. I know this may be a little hard to see. So when this PowerPoint is emailed to you, there will also be a handout version of this on a Word document with a link at the bottom, so you can easily click and you can go right to the source if you want. But I'm a very visual person, so I thought this was super cool, friendly way for you to figure out what goes with this thing. And I really like, for example, some of these just say everything. And I think that's a good reminder that wine and cheese is meant to be tasty. It's meant to be fun. Yes, it can be complicated, but please don't feel that it's intimidating or it's too hoity-toity for you to enjoy. At the end of the day, it's just something yummy that you can enjoy, that tastes good. And like I said, talking about terroir maybe helps you to appreciate the environment and the people that create our food a little more. Okay, so I did want to include, even though this is a wine and cheese presentation, some non-alcoholic alternatives, because let's say you have a party. I'm not saying you should have a party at this moment in time, but let's say you decide to have a party at some point, and maybe there are some people that are designated drivers, or maybe there are some people that just, they don't drink. How can you give them a special and a nice experience as well? There are many beverages that pair well with cheese. It's not just wine, and clearly beer and cider and other alcoholic beverages go well with cheese as well. But teas go well with cheeses. And you keep in mind the exact same sort of principles about balance and tannin levels and trying to get them to complement each other. And you can see from the slide that the tea one is a hyperlink. So you can click and you can go to that and you can read up on it if you're a tea aficionado. Something else that's nice to serve with cheese is mineral water. I'm actually, because I've been out in the heat, I'm enjoying mineral water tonight. And I saw Maria had some when she came in too. The bubbles, just like a sparkling wine, they cut through some of the fat with the cheese. And so it kind of helps cleanse your palate. It's very balancing. It's very refreshing. You could also consider serving more European style sodas. I don't want to sound like a snob, but if you're looking to make it a little special, a little elevated, you're probably not going to give your guests, Mountain Dew to go with your Camembert. So by European sodas, I mean ones that have more complex flavors, that maybe have a slightly lower sugar content. I've seen some really cool ones at Aldi in glass bottles. I saw one, it was elderflower soda. I've seen lavender sodas. And of course, if you go to like an Italian market, you can find different Italian sodas that are in really nice flavors. The fourth one is a little food nerd-ish. Those are shrubs. Shrubs are basically like drinking vinegars. And if you go to like an Asian grocery store, like Lottie in Germantown, you may see drinking vinegars and you may think, what is this? But they've been enjoyed around the world for many, many, many years. And early on in the colonial segment of the United States history, settlers would drink these shrubs, drinking vinegars, that were considered a little bit of a health tonic. I don't really want to say they were the forerunner of kombucha because they're not fermented in the same way, but maybe the same kind of tangy, light flavor profile. But these pair really well with cheeses. If you want to explore a different taste, you can click on that link there. They can give you some recommendations about shrubs. It's also something you can make fairly easily yourself at home. Juices are also great. Again, if you're providing this for people that want an alcoholic alternative, please don't buy like the Juicy Juice fruit boxes. Try to buy maybe a nicer style of juice, maybe even a sparkling juice or a nectar. And ciders as well. You can get ciders made from a variety of fruits, like pears, not just apples, and they don't have to be hard ciders. So all of these can give your guests or give yourself a nice, refreshing pairing with those cheeses, minus the alcohol. Okay, I'm watching my time, I'm doing well. So here's some tips for serving and storing cheeses. Because let's face it, if you're going to buy some quality cheeses, it can be an outlier of some money. So you want to make sure that you're enjoying them properly and that you're storing them properly so you get your full money's worth. So if you're going to be serving your cheese, you want to bring it to room temperature for full flavor and best texture. The rule of thumb too is the older, the harder the cheese, the more aged, the longer it will take to warm up. If you have a young, fresh, unaged cheese like a mozzarella, a chèvre, they're going to warm up much more quickly. And why do you need to do this? Again, thinking back to that slide about sort of the science of taste and aroma, you can pick up on a lot more of the aroma and flavor compounds when it's at room temperature. The cold tamps all of those things down. So a lot of the complex flavors of the cheese, if you were to take a wonderful cheese and eat it right out of the fridge, it would probably still taste good, but it wouldn't have the amazing complexity of flavor if you let it come to room temperature. And same thing with best texture. There's a really nice fresh cheese called Brillat Savarin, and it's a French cheese, very simple, but it has this delicate, light, fluffy texture. It's like enjoying clouds of like cheese ecstasy. It's amazing. And just really, transportive kind of flavor. But if you take it straight out of the fridge, it's very heavy. It's very dense. You don't get that light texture. Another great one, which is one of my favorites, if you like a Bloomy Rhine cheese, so like a brie, a camembert, try this Italian cheese called La Tour, T-U-R. That one actually is so delicate. When you buy it, it comes in a little box and it just has the shrink wrap lid. And when you take this little cheese out, it looks like a little cupcake, or it looks like Jackie O's pillbox hat. But same kind of thing, it has this delicate, wonderful texture. But if you were to take it right out of the fridge, you'd be like, this is good, but it's not impressive. So be patient when you're serving good cheeses. When you're serving cheeses, just like the slides earlier, you want to sequence from the mildest flavor to the strongest flavor. So you're not overwhelming your palate, and so that you can more accurately taste and savor each of the cheeses and the wines that go with them. If you have a lot of cheeses out, you also want to use a different knife for each cheese. You don't want someone to slice into the blue cheese and then have them slice into a very mild fresh cheese, because it's going to cross-contaminate the flavors. Also, if you're doing like a big cheese tasting, you want to have water on hand. So between the different cheeses, you can take a sip and you can cleanse your palate. And when you're serving it, you want to serve them with some mildly flavored vehicles. So like crackers, breads, breadsticks. There are all kinds of really cool flavored breads out there and crackers. I would tell you to go for one that has a neutral flavor. So that way the focus can be on the flavor of the cheese and the flavor of the wine rather than the cracker. And of course, you can always serve your cheeses with fruits, with nuts, charcuterie, jams, honey, mustards, olives, pickles, whatever you like. I made a little cheese board for tonight. I don't know what I would call it. I suppose I could call it a summertime in the ag reserve cheese board. And I'm happy to say that all of the stuff on here came from local producers and or my garden. I'm a little nervous. I don't want to dump this all over my computer. So this is a Bloomy Rind goat cheese from Cherry Glen. I got it at Poolsville Farmers Market on the Commons. So you can see the outside has a bloomy rind like a brie, and has this dense texture on the outside edges like a brie, but the inside is kind of crumbly and light like a fresh chev. So really nice cheese for summer when these temperatures are really getting to us. Then I have a fig from my garden. I have some fresh basil from my garden. I have bread from Locals Market, some heirloom cherry tomatoes from my garden, and some fresh peaches from Kingsbury. So if you're making a cheese tray, you can make it as simple or as complicated as you want. You could make it seasonal. You could make it country themed. Like you might say, hey, we're gonna have a Spanish themed wine and cheese night. And you could just do a range of Spanish cheeses, Spanish wines, and then accompaniments from Spain to go with it. So like I said, cheese and wine should be fun. It shouldn't be fussy. So feel free to let your imagination run wild and just enjoy. And then when you're done with your cheese, if you have leftovers, you want to wrap that cheese back up in the wrapping it came from in the store. You can then add another layer of either wax paper or parchment paper, and you could put it in a Ziploc bag or some kind of airtight container in the coldest part of your fridge. You don't want to mix cheeses. So like if you have like a Manchego and a Brie and a Munster, you wouldn't wrap them all up and put them in one box, because again, those flavors are going to cross-contaminate each other. Here we go back with the temperature, and thinking back to that sort of scientific diagram, temperature does really affect our perception of taste and of flavor. You want to make sure both the cheese and the wine are served at optimal temperatures. Cheese should be served at room temperature. You want your red wines to be slightly chilled. You want your whites to be well chilled, and you also want your sparkling wines to be well chilled. Again, this isn't something you should feel pressured to memorize. It's something you can easily Google for reference. How long do you have to refrigerate a bottle of wine or take it out ahead of time to bring it to the optimal temperature? Now, let's say you want to give this some structure. You're like, okay, I'm going to kind of make it official, tasting this wine and cheese together. So if you were to do this, the recommended process is to start with the wine. And again, this is my sparkling water. So you could do it with whatever beverage you're enjoying. So you would first hold that in your mouth a little bit, let yourself really get the flavor of wine. You could take a couple sips. And then you would take a small bite of cheese. So I'm going to slice off a little bit of this. It's Monocacy Silver from Cherry Glen Goat Cheese Farm. And I'm basically going through those bullet points at the bottom. So you want to take that small bite of cheese, hold it on your palate, right? So you're really getting it, you're coating your tongue, all of the taste buds on your tongue. You're making sure that those retronasal receptors are picking up on the scents and aromas of the cheese. You're also warming it a little bit So all of those volatile oils and those fats and those tasty flavors and the cheese are really blooming inside your mouth. Then you take a little sip of wine, you let them mingle a little bit. And then you kind of taste as you hold it there for a moment. Then you swallow and you kind of reflect, oh, how was that? And then, of course, if you're switching between different cheeses or different wines, you would want to cleanse your palate between with some water or maybe a bite of cracker or bread. But those are sort of the basics for trying them out and seeing, does this go well together? Does this go not so well together? And you can kind of do the same thing with those steps with the food. So, you know, if I wanted to say, hey, I wonder how this peach would be with a little bit of basil. And how would it be if I added some cheese and I put it on the baguette? You could kind of build all of those different flavors together if you would like to. So here's some resources. The first one is really great. It's a cheese magazine, which I actually have a subscription to because that's how crazy I am about cheese. However, if you do not want to commit to a subscription, their website is fantastic. So the first link is their cheese library, where you can go to learn more about specific types of cheese. So you could look up your favorite. You could look up a brie or manchego or roquefort, whatever you like. The second bullet point is also from that magazine website. Some tips for a cheese and wine pairing party. And it could be a party of just one or two or a larger gathering. The third one is a nice cheat sheet for pairing wine and cheese together. And then the last bullet point is a fun website. This creator has made all these cheese plates. I mean, huge, elaborate, fancy, almost like works of art, down to very basic, simple ones that you could easily do for yourself at home. She's done some cute ones where they're just like for one person, like movie night in. So some things that you could simply enjoy. She also has a book too, which the public library has available if you're more of a book person. So this has been the wine and cheese presentation. We still have plenty of time for questions, so that's great. The next Poolesville Seniors event I'll be doing is on Maryland food history, and that's on September 30th. And my website's there. You can go there from my blog. You can also go there from my events calendar. I have some other stuff coming up. Let's see. I wanted to tell you I do sessions for the Smithsonian as well. And I have one coming up on September 10th about food in Baltimore. So if that interests you, you can go to my website and find out about that. And I also have my book, which just came out a few months ago, and I did all of the illustration for it. I wrote it, and I created my own custom font for the book. And you can check that out on my website. And we also have it locally here at Locals for sale, and also up in Frederick at Curious Iguana. And if you have any questions or suggestions, my email is right there, and it's on my website as well. Thank you. So let's do the Q&A. I'll stop sharing my screen so people can see each other. I think that's a little more friendly.
And just a reminder, everyone, we'll email you that presentation so you can go back and reference it anytime that you like. The first question I see in the chat says, how long do hard cheeses age? Are they labeled with dates like wine?
Yeah, great question. So generally, like higher quality hard cheeses will have an age on them. You have some that can be aged, believe it or not, up to 5 years. Which is quite old, for sure.
What is your favorite go-to of all of the pairings that you discussed?
Oh no. These questions are always so hard. I would say probably, again, the Latour, that little cupcake Jackie O pillbox hat Italian cheese with a nice Prosecco. Yeah.
Where do you buy that cheese?
So good news, you can actually get it at Wegmans. They don't always carry it. So sometimes it's hit or miss, but just try back if you can't. A lot of people don't realize that cheese is a seasonal product, particularly if it's not cow's milk cheese. Sometimes it can be a little harder to find it at certain times of the year.
You talked a little bit about some of the fruits and whatnot that you could pair with it. Could you talk a little bit more about pairing fruits and choosing fruits and vegetables to go with your wine and cheese?
Absolutely. And this is something again that you can Google too if you're curious about a specific item. Generally with fruits and veggies, you want to avoid citrus. Citrus can be really problematic for both wine and for cheese on its own. If it's blended in with something else as part of a dish, it's a little easier to pair with. Another notorious one you want to avoid is artichokes. Artichokes can be quite tricky to pair with wine, though they're very delicious with cheese. I would say generally fruits that are more straightforward in flavor, a lot of stone fruits this time of year, like the peaches. I think I said I got these peaches at Kingsbury Orchard, just outside of town. They're very delicious. Nectarines in the spring, berries, of course, are delicious, especially with a lot of the lighter, younger cheeses. And as we're going into fall, you know, a lot of our orchard fruits are really delicious with cheeses as well. Apples, pears are amazing with cheese. And I really like persimmons with cheese as well. I have a persimmon tree in my yard, so I'm quite spoiled. And of course, figs. I think I showed you my fig earlier. Figs are nice with cheese too. One of my favorite sandwiches and one of my daughter's favorite sandwiches is to get nice sourdough bread, to get a Granny Smith apple or a similar apple, not a really sweet apple. It needs to have some tartness to it. Slice that apple very thinly and then get some brie, slice the brie, put it on the bread, drizzle it with some honey. And I should say we have great local beekeepers here in the area as well. This is from Dan Savino. This is from Joe Long. Honey and cheese go great together. So I drizzle all of that with a little bit of honey, and then I make a grilled cheese with it. And it's absolutely wonderful. So there again, you're going back to this idea of balance. So if you're wondering, what about this fruit? What about this vegetable? Which wine? What cheese? Look for that principle of balance and really think about the taste.
I see a question in the chat that says, have you explored making wine or cheese?
Oh, wine, no way. Though I admire people that do. I mean, I think it's one of these things that's both an art and a science for sure. I have so many hobbies already. I don't need another high maintenance hobby, but I have, with my girls, made cheese. We got a cheese kit and we made like a fresh, basically like a ricotta. And I will tell you, it was amazing how many gallons of milk go into like this much cheese. I said, I'm going to leave this to the experts, but it was fun.
That's really cool. Do we have any more questions? Feel free to either send them in the chat or unmute and ask them yourself. I was wondering, besides like a good sourdough bread, what kind of breads do you think are best for pairing? Like I know like a sandwich bread, a normal sandwich bread would probably be a little bit too thick. So where would you recommend going to get something a little bit more elegant?
Yeah, I would say again, and I know I sound like a commercial for the Ag Reserve, but I think we should all be cheerleaders of the Ag Reserve. You know, at Locals, they make delicious bread. The Kaleva Farm Market also has delicious bread. K2 Cafe, which used to be Cafe 107 right by the high school, they also have a wonderful baker there. And beyond bread, she makes some desserts. It looks like you're in a pâtisserie in Paris somewhere. So I would say wherever you get your bread from, try to get some more of like sort of the artisan style bread that maybe has a little more texture to it than just, you know, like Wonder Bread, which is very soft and doesn't really stand up to the weight of cheese.
I see a question that says, are you a fan of local wines? And if so, which ones?
Oh, let's see. Well, it depends on how local you're talking about. Generally, I really like red wines. And the last time I've been out at Wind Ridge, this may have changed. They primarily had a lot of whites, which were tasty. It's just not my thing in general. South Mountain Vineyard has really good wines. I think their reds are very nice. I'm a Francophile, if you didn't pick up on that. And so they do a lot of French style wines out there. So if you enjoy that, that's a good one as well. Rockland's wines, I haven't had in some time. I think since the last time I had Rockland's wines, they got a new winemaker. So I'm not sure if their style has changed. But I would say for the state of Maryland, probably the best Maryland wine I've ever had in general is from Big Cork, which I believe is out in Washington County. Really delicious wines and beautiful view out there as well.
You mentioned Wind Ridge. That's actually a good time for us to mention that at Poolsville Day, if you stop by our booth, we'll be doing a drawing for a tasting for 2 from Wind Ridge. So it's actually a great time. So make sure to drop by and check out our booth on Poolsville Day. Mm-hmm. I see another question saying, what is your book about?
Oh, my book has nothing to do with wine or cheese. So basically it's 20 sort of life lessons or little meditations, and each one's accompanied by artwork. So the title's Rainbows in the Rain and Stars in the Dark, Inspiration for Positive Living. And the inspiration for the title came from a Oscar Wilde quote. And he said, when it's dark, when it rains, look for rainbows. When it's dark, look for stars. And so it's sort of affirming that life can be very hard and challenging sometimes, but that we should always continue to look for those stars and look for those rainbows and sort of press on. I like it because it's very simple. I feel that a child could read it and appreciate the message, as well as adults could read it and kind of approach them as a little meditation. And all the artwork I did myself. Even you could flip through and just look at the artwork. The artwork itself is very cheerful and energetic, and it's abstract. So you can look at it and kind of let your mind wander a little bit. And I'm also donating 10% of the proceeds to the Omid Foundation, which works with disadvantaged young girls and women right now at one of the large refugee camps in Greece. So it's an organization that I really feel strongly about. Thank you for asking, whoever asked.
Yeah, that's beautiful artwork and such a great cause as well. I see a question that says, do you have information on pairing wine and truffles?
Ooh. Now, are you talking about truffles like the mushroom or truffles like the little chocolates?
Rich, was it truffles like the mushrooms or like the chocolates?
Chocolates.
Yeah. It's definitely a tasty pairing. So when Chrysofuli's cheese shop in downtown Frederick was still around, I did a session around Valentine's Day on chocolate, cheese, and wine. That was a fun one, let me tell you. But there are so many different chocolates out there. You can kind of approach it the same way as the cheeses. So you could start with a very mild chocolate that's kind of straightforward, like a milk chocolate, even a white chocolate, even though that's technically not chocolate. And then you can work your way up to more complex, darker chocolates, or even like flavor added chocolates. I will tell you, my favorite local chocolate shop, which is actually local, is Spanvola, which is in the Kentlands, right over in Gaithersburg. That is some delicious chocolate. So they have truffles. They also have little, gosh, I can't remember what they call them, these little confections. And they have, I really like floral flavors. And so they have some that include lavender. They have one that has jasmine, as well as more, traditional things. So check out Spanvola. They're quite tasty. But yeah, you could have a good time with some wine and some truffles for sure.
Good.
I see one that says, if you enjoy spicy food vehicles like jalapenos or spicy charcuterie, what kind of wine would you suggest?
Ooh, that's a big question, because a lot of people enjoy, really flavorful cuisines like Indian food and Thai food, and they think, what kind of wine could I enjoy with this? And one that seems to come up a lot is Gewurztramine or a Riesling, tend to be a nice wine with spicy foods. You want to avoid any kind of tannic, heavy wines with spicy foods. So you want something that's more light. You want something that's more fruity, that's more straightforward in flavor. Even a touch of sweetness, even if that's not normally your thing, you're going for balance, remember? So that can be quite nice as well.
Do we have any more questions?
If there are no more questions, I want to tell you a cheese story before we close out, if everybody has a minute.
Yeah, go right ahead.
Cool. So some crazy timing, January 2020, I led Frederick Community College's food and culture themed trip to Italy. Oh my gosh. And we got back right before, all the COVID mess started. And a lot of the early cases, as you might recall, were reported in Italy. So it was completely wild that we made it. Well, anyway, as you might imagine, in Italy, I had some really amazing food and definitely some really amazing cheeses. One of my favorite memories of the entire trip illustrated for me this idea of terroir, of taste of place, and how cheese can really be specific to a particular culture. Now, most of us, enjoy a nice fresh mozzarella cheese, right? Like this time of year, it's delicious. You might make a caprese salad with some tomatoes and fresh basil. It's so nice. But I hate to tell you, a lot of what we eat in the United States that's fresh mozzarella, most Italians would be like, that's not fresh. And in fact, in southern parts of Italy, where a lot of the water buffalo, which is where most of their fresh mozzarella cheese come from, where a lot of the cheese is made, many people in these towns will line up in the morning to get this fresh mozzarella that's still warm. And so for many people in Italy, if it's more than an hour or so old, it's not fresh anymore. Now, I'd share all that with a little bit of whatever reservation. We were in Rome and we were in the Trastevere neighborhood. I'm working on my Italian. And we were wandering around and actually got quite lost. And we happened across this little side street with this cheese shop. And so we went in and, old floors, old wall, old appliances, nowhere to sit. And I looked at the walls and they were just covered in newspaper and magazine articles from around the world. We had stumbled upon this historic, amazing cheese shop in the heart of Rome by accident. And so I was with my friend, the co-trip leader, who is Italian. Her Italian's much better than mine. About all I can do is order something off the menu and say thank you. But she was talking to the shop owner and she said, my friend loves cheese and we'd like to have some of your cheese. And there's not really a culture of walking around in Italy and snacking as you walk. And there were no tables there. You know, it's not like in the US, you would have like your napkin dispenser and you could grab some napkins and what have you. And so he said, sure. He says, here, this fresh mozzarella. And he had a story about the mozzarella. So here he had this bucket with the brine and these balls of fresh mozzarella. So he got a small one out for my friend and I, and we had it in this package. And we just sat there and we were eating pieces of this fresh mozzarella, just peeling it off. And I can't even explain to you the texture and the flavors, and you could truly taste the freshness. Because when I read that thing years ago about people in Italy won't eat, you know, mozzarella that's more than a few hours old, I'm like, come on now, like that's ridiculous. But when I tried it all these years later, I thought, I see now why it was such a difference. And I have to tell you, so we're standing there, and it's fresh mozzarella. So all of this like brine is like dripping down our hands. There's no napkins. I don't have anything in my purse. And, you know, I was wearing a dress or something. I didn't want to wipe my hands on it. This shopkeeper who was probably in really his 60s or 70s, he had been working at that store his whole life. He came out from behind the counter. He said, here, very kindly, he was wearing his apron. He let us wipe our hands on his apron. So it was just this amazing, completely unexpected moment of kindness and deliciousness and just this cultural light bulb. And I really believe in that. And, you know, even if we can't travel the way we would like to right now, you know, I think enjoying a new culture can be as easy as trying a new food, right? Let me try this new cheese. Let me try this new wine, and maybe learning a little bit about the people who made it or where it came from. And it can really enrich your lives. So I'd like to close with that.
Yeah, that sounds like maybe the ultimate way to have a cheese tasting. So truly, thank you so much for including us and giving us a little taste of some good wine and cheese pairings so that we can get involved and have a little extra culture while things are all shut down anyways. I hope you all enjoyed tonight's presentation as much as I did and learned something new. Of course, if you have any questions, you can always email us later at info@poolesvilleseniors.org and we can pass them on for you. If you'd like to unmute or turn on your camera to say goodbye, now's the time. If you're joining us on Facebook Live, please leave us a like and a comment. We'd like to thank Christine for this presentation, as well as our ongoing sponsors and contributors that help us keep our programs going, because we love putting them on for you. If you enjoyed tonight's program, please consider joining us for more upcoming events. Like I said, we'll be back this time next week with Kenny Scholl's August Historic Property Lecture. You can check out our website, poolesvilleseniors.org, for more info and registration. And thank you all so much for attending. Have a good night.
Thank you, Christine.
Thank you,
It was
Christine.
great, as usual.
Marvelous.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Have
you.
a wonderful night. And most importantly, enjoy.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Bye-bye.